This happens when an empath woman stops caring. Most people never notice the moment it begins. They think the breaking point is loud. They think it arrives with shouting, slammed doors, dramatic exits, and final speeches. They imagine that when someone reaches the end of their patience, the world will hear it. But they are wrong, especially when that person is an empath woman, because an empath woman does not stop caring all at once. She stops caring in layers. She stops caring in silent pieces. She stops caring in the spaces where nobody thought to look. For years, she gives chances that nobody earns. She carries conversations that should have ended months ago. She forgives explanations that make no sense. She absorbs tension, disappointment, and emotional weight that was never hers to carry. She listens, she understands, she waits, she hopes, and hope is often mistaken for weakness. People see her kindness and assume it has no limits. They see her patience and assume it cannot run out. They see her compassion and assume it is permanent. But every empath woman eventually learns a truth that changes everything. The people who value her the least often expect the most from her. And once she sees that truth clearly, something begins to shift, not in her behavior, not at first. Inside, the shift is invisible before it becomes obvious. She starts noticing patterns she used to ignore. She starts hearing excuses that once sounded convincing. She starts recognizing how often her energy is requested but rarely returned. The same people who called her strong suddenly become uncomfortable when she stops carrying their burdens. The same people who depended on her understanding suddenly become confused when she begins understanding herself. And that confusion creates a dangerous illusion. They think she is still there. They think she will keep giving. They think she will keep waiting. They think tomorrow will look exactly like yesterday. But tomorrow is different, because the moment an empath woman stops caring is not the moment she becomes cold. It is the moment she becomes clear. Clear about who respects her. Clear about who uses her. Clear about what she deserves. Clear about what she will never tolerate again. And clarity is powerful, far more powerful than anger. Anger can be argued with. Anger can be manipulated. Anger can be distracted. But clarity cannot. Once a person sees the truth, they cannot unsee it. Once a person recognizes a pattern, they cannot pretend it is random. Once a person understands their worth, they become difficult to control. That is why people are often shocked by her transformation, not because she changed, but because she stopped pretending not to see. Think about that. The strongest boundary is not built with aggression. It is built with certainty. An empath woman who still cares will explain herself repeatedly. An empath woman who has stopped caring no longer feels the need. She does not argue every accusation. She does not chase every misunderstanding. She does not fight every battle. She simply steps back and lets reality reveal itself. And that silence becomes louder than any speech she could have given. People start asking questions. Why is she distant? Why is she quiet? Why is she no longer available? Why does she seem different? But the truth is simple. She is no longer spending her energy convincing others of what should have been obvious. Respect should not require persuasion. Loyalty should not require begging. Love should not require self-destruction. And when she finally understands that, everything changes. The emotional access that once came easily is gone. The endless second chances disappear. The benefit of the doubt becomes harder to earn, not because she became heartless, because she became wise. There is a difference. A heartless person stops caring because they feel nothing. A wise person stops caring because they finally understand everything they needed to understand. And that understanding creates freedom. Freedom from guilt, freedom from manipulation, freedom from the exhausting cycle of giving more and receiving less. For the first time in a long time, she chooses herself, not above everyone, not against everyone, just no longer beneath everyone. That decision changes the entire structure of her life. Relationships change, conversations change, expectations change, people change. Some people respect her boundaries and grow closer. Others disappear because access was the only thing they valued. And that revelation can be painful, but it is also priceless because every departure teaches the same lesson. The wrong people leave when the benefits stop. The right people stay when the standards rise. So when an empath woman stops caring, do not mistake it for weakness. Do not mistake it for bitterness. Do not mistake it for defeat. What you are witnessing is something far more significant. You are witnessing the end of self-abandonment. You are witnessing the moment she stops negotiating with her own value. You are witnessing the moment she realizes that protecting her peace is not selfish. It is necessary. And once she reaches that point, there is rarely a return to who she used to be, not because she lost her kindness, but because she finally learned where kindness belongs, not everywhere, not endlessly, not at the expense of herself. An empath woman who stops caring does not become less powerful. She becomes impossible to exploit. And that is the moment everything changes. What makes this transformation so difficult for other people to understand is that it does not look dramatic from the outside. There is no warning siren, no official announcement, no declaration that the old version of her is disappearing. Life continues as normal. The phone still rings. The messages still arrive. The requests still come. The expectations remain exactly where they have always been. But something fundamental has changed. For years, she responded from obligation. Now she responds from intention. For years, she felt responsible for emotions that did not belong to her. Now she understands the difference between empathy and responsibility. That difference changes everything because many people confuse being understanding with being available. They confuse compassion with compliance. They confuse kindness with permission. An empath woman often spends years carrying emotional debts she never owed. She becomes the listener, the rescuer, the peacemaker, the emotional first responder for every crisis in the lives around her. And while everyone celebrates her strength, very few ask about the cost. Very few notice how much energy disappears behind the scenes. Very few realize that constantly being the source of comfort can become exhausting when nobody notices who comforts the comforter. That exhaustion does not arrive suddenly. It accumulates, one disappointment at a time, one broken promise at a time, one one-sided relationship at a time, one overlooked sacrifice at a time. Each event seems small on its own, almost insignificant, but over time they stack together. And eventually the weight becomes impossible to ignore. The remarkable thing about human beings is that they can tolerate almost anything for a short period of time. But what breaks people is repetition, not the single betrayal. The pattern, not the single disappointment. The pattern, not the single moment of disrespect. The pattern. Pause tell the truth that isolated events often hide. And when an empath woman begins recognizing patterns, she starts seeing her life differently. She notices who only calls when they need something. She notices who disappears when she needs support. She notices who celebrates her generosity but resents her boundaries. She notices who enjoys receiving but rarely reciprocates. And once those observations become impossible to ignore, a new question emerges. A question that changes everything. What if I stopped carrying what was never mine? At first, that question feels uncomfortable, even dangerous, because she has spent so much of her life identifying with being needed, being useful, being available, being the one who always understands. Walking away from those roles can feel like abandoning part of her identity, but what she eventually discovers is something powerful. She is not abandoning herself. She is finding herself. There is a difference. For years, she thought love meant endurance. She thought loyalty meant unlimited access. She thought compassion meant sacrificing her own well-being. Now she begins redefining those beliefs. Love without respect is not love. Loyalty without reciprocity is not loyalty. Compassion without boundaries becomes self-neglect. These realizations do not make her harder. They make her healthier. And healthy people often appear unfamiliar to those who benefited from their unhealthy patterns. That is why resistance appears. The moment she changes, someone complains. The moment she establishes a boundary, someone feels offended. The moment she says no, someone accuses her of changing. And they are right. She has changed. Growth always looks like change to people who preferred your limitations. Think about that carefully. Some individuals never objected to your struggles. They objected to your recovery. They never challenged your sacrifices. They challenged your standards. They never disliked who you were. They disliked losing unrestricted access to who you were. That realization is uncomfortable, but it is also liberating because it reveals something important. Not everyone who wants your energy deserves your energy. Not everyone who seeks your attention values your attention. Not everyone who requests your help appreciates your help. And once she understands that, her entire approach begins to shift. She becomes selective, intentional, aware, not because she has less love to give, because she finally understands the value of what she gives. A river does not apologize for having banks. Without boundaries, it becomes a flood. Without direction, it becomes chaos. Its strength comes from structure. The same is true for people. The strongest hearts are not the ones that give endlessly. They are the ones that give wisely. An empath woman who stops caring about pleasing. Everyone begins caring about truth instead. Truth becomes more important than approval. Peace becomes more important than performance. Authenticity becomes more important than acceptance. That transition is one of the most powerful shifts a person can experience because approval is addictive. Many people spend their entire lives chasing it. They shape their words around it. They shape their decisions around it. They shape their identities around it. They become strangers to themselves in exchange for acceptance from others. But eventually, an empath woman reaches a point where approval loses its power. She realizes that no amount of self-sacrifice guarantees appreciation. No amount of overextending guarantees loyalty. No amount of people-pleasing guarantees love. And once she sees that, she stops negotiating with reality. She stops trying to earn what should be freely given. She stops chasing validation from people who withhold it as leverage. She stops shrinking herself to make others comfortable. The result is extraordinary. She becomes calm, not because life becomes easier, because she becomes stronger. There is a unique kind of confidence that emerges when a person no longer fears disappointing others. Not recklessness, not selfishness. Freedom, the freedom to tell the truth. The freedom to choose peace. The freedom to walk away from what drains them. The freedom to protect what matters. And that freedom changes the atmosphere around her. People notice it immediately. Her presence feels different. Her energy feels different. Her responses feel different. The woman who once explained every decision now simply makes decisions. The woman who once tolerated endless disrespect now quietly leaves. The woman who once carried everyone's emotional weight now asks a simple question: is this mine to carry? If the answer is no, she sets it down. No guilt, no apology, no dramatic explanation, just clarity. And clarity is often mistaken for coldness by people who benefited from confusion. But clarity is not cruelty. It is honesty. It is self-respect in action. It is understanding that every yes to something unhealthy becomes a no to something valuable. Every unnecessary burden consumes energy that could be used for growth. Every toxic attachment occupies space that could be filled with peace. Every act of self-betrayal weakens trust in oneself. That is why the transformation becomes irreversible. Once she experiences the peace that comes from honoring herself, returning to old patterns feels impossible. She remembers what it felt like to constantly overextend, to constantly explain, to constantly rescue, to constantly absorb, and she realizes something profound. She was surviving relationships that should have been supporting her. She was maintaining connections that should have been mutual. She was carrying responsibilities that should have been shared. And now she knows better. The most dangerous thing for people who relied on her endless giving is not her anger. It is her awareness. Because awareness cannot be manipulated for long. Awareness notices contradictions. Awareness notices intentions. Awareness notices behavior. And behavior always reveals what words attempt to hide. That is why, when an empath woman truly stops caring, she becomes incredibly difficult to deceive. She listens less to promises. She pays more attention to actions. She listens less to excuses. She pays more attention to patterns. She listens less to intentions. She pays more attention to outcomes. And suddenly the world becomes much easier to understand because reality is often simple once emotions stop obscuring it. People reveal themselves repeatedly. The challenge is not seeing it. The challenge is accepting what you see. Once she accepts it, she gains something priceless, the ability to respond to reality instead of hope. Hope has its place. But hope without evidence can become a trap. Hope can convince people to stay where they should leave. Hope can convince people to tolerate what they should challenge. Hope can convince people to wait for change that never arrives. An empath woman who stops caring about illusions begins caring about facts. And facts have a way of simplifying decisions. Not easy decisions, clear decisions. There is a difference. Clarity does not remove pain. It removes confusion, and when confusion disappears, strength emerges. That strength is not loud, it does not demand attention, it does not seek applause, it simply exists, steady, certain, unshakable. The kind of strength that comes from finally knowing who you are and refusing to abandon yourself for anyone else's convenience. That is the moment her life begins moving in a new direction, not because the world changed, because she did. There comes a moment in every profound transformation when the person realizes that the greatest battle was never with other people. It was with themselves, with the version of themselves that believed their worth had to be earned, with the version of themselves that confused being needed with being valued, with the version of themselves that thought constant sacrifice was the price of connection. An empath woman often spends years trying to become everything for everyone. She becomes adaptable, flexible, understanding, past torn, forgiving. And while those qualities are beautiful, they become dangerous when they exist without limits, because a gift without boundaries eventually becomes an expectation. What was once appreciated becomes assumed. What was once respected becomes demanded. What was once voluntary becomes required. And somewhere along the way, she begins living according to expectations she never consciously agreed to carry. That realization can be shocking. Not because the truth is hidden, because it has been visible for so long. Human beings have an incredible ability to normalize what hurts them. If something happens once, it stands out. If it happens 100 times, it starts feeling normal. That is why unhealthy dynamics often survive for years. People adapt to them. They explain them away. They minimize them. They tell themselves stories that make the situation easier to tolerate.